actually, there's a big divide in the panpsychist research community. You get some panpsychists who are very reductionist. The philosopher Luke Roelofs is perhaps a leading figure here, who want to say, really, there's just conscious particles, and what we call Cameron's mind is just a label for a complex combination of conscious particles. I'm increasingly skeptical of that view. For reasons I articulate in my book to do with the evolution of consciousness. And I've got an article in Scientific American out today, actually pushing this point.
Saw that.
So you also have non-reductionist forms of panpsychism, where the conscious particles, where consciousness sort of comes in layers, right? You've got consciousness at the level of particles, new forms of consciousness at the level of molecules, at the level of the brain. And these new forms of consciousness come with new entities, with new causal dynamics, new forms of behavior. So again, on this non-reductionist view, you would have these very robust, in a sense, irreducible kind of new entities. Are they simple? Well, I don't know. I mean, they're not simple in the sense that they're very complicated. They even have parts. So I guess I'm skeptical that there's any good philosophical argument that the mind doesn't have parts. I think the mind seems to have parts. It seems to be very complicated. But I think there are pretty persuasive arguments that the mind is maybe in some sense irreducible. But still, the panpsychist can accept that. If you're this kind of non-reductionist panpsychist, you can accept that the mind is the brain, but the mind-brain is some radically irreducible entity.
Yeah, I think you can maybe you can get irreducibility of the subject. It's not clear what the actual subject is still, though. I mean, if the subject is this sort of complex brain that has these teleological properties that sort of unify it in some way, then we still have something that really is akin to materialism in a problematic way that seems to defy...
Why problematic? Why problematic? Why problematic?
Well, it seems to defy this sort of unity of consciousness that seems that we are so... that we're both in agreement with in terms of how we phenomenologically experience our own conscious states of awareness.
But Josh, is that really a problem if we've got this non-reductionist panpsychism where we've got these new irreducible entities emerging? And I mean, as I talk about in my Scientific American article, there's certain movements in different bits of science opposing the reductionist view of science, like the assembly theory by Lee Cronin and Sarah Walker, like Kevin Mitchell's defending sort of emergentism and libertarian free will in a physicalist paradigm. So I think it's something of a dogma, this very reductionist conception of science. And you can be a panpsychist where you do think there are these radically irreducible unified entities popping up at greater levels of complexity. And so why can't we make sense of a subject, a unity of consciousness? Yeah, I don't see why.
Philip,
yeah.
Do you mind if I not to go completely off topic, this is not off topic, but so recently on the show, there's a recent movie that came out called After Death. Have you guys heard of it? It's in the theaters right now. I did a couple shows on it, did one with the director, but it's about neardeath experiences.
I was going to get to near-death experiences later.
Oh, you were? Okay.
I mean, if you want to. That was going to be a final sort of move at the end, yes. But,
okay.
If you want to ruin it, I guess you can.
Well, the reason why, the thing that got me thinking about that was when Philip says, well, we can just identify the subject with the brain. And then my immediate thought that came up was, well, we have these near-death experiences where these people recount, out-of-body experiences. They've seen things in the operating room that can be verified by, third parties and everything. And so that would seem to provide some counter evidence to that idea that the consciousness can be identified with, some sort of physical brain or something like that. This is an area I know that not everyone has researched, so I don't want to put Philip on the spot here if this is not.
I think that's further buttressing evidence of the fact that panpsychism probably doesn't have the explanatory power to make sense of the richness of of the kind of unity of consciousness that we do have that's dependent upon something like a metaphysical simple, of which brains just are not. And we know enough about brains, and we know enough, even first order, logically prior, we know enough about our own consciousness that doesn't seem to provide a sufficient analog for brains being the kinds of things that themselves are conscious. But I think the near-death experiences really should just take us out of naturalism altogether. That was going to be a larger discussion that I was hoping
Well,
to have.
actually, this might be a good time to transition to the second partition of the discussion period, which is whether or not we need to ground consciousness in God. So let's move to that. Obviously, we'll start with Philip to get his response to anything that was just said, and then we'll move into that.
So look, yeah, I would agree that near-death experience, if there is evidence that the mind, well, it's a bit tricky. There are actually Christian physicalists like Peter van Inwagen who believe in life after death in a physical sense. But putting that on one side, I guess I would agree out-of-body experiences are evidence for dualism. I mean, this is getting into thorny empirical issues rather than philosophical issues. My issue with this is like, how do these, even supposing there's this immaterial soul that leaves the body, how does it see without eyes? How does it remember without a brain? And if we can see without eyes, why did we evolve eyes? I don't know. There's all sorts of things that I struggle to make sense of here. And books on this tend to just give the empirical evidence and don't go into, trying to actually make robust metaphysical sense of these concerns. Like, Descartes thought you couldn't remember or see without a brain. So I do have those worries, but I agree. Yeah, it potentially would be empirical evidence against panpsychism.
Well, I mean, yeah. What do we say to that? I think it is. I think it's strong evidence against panpsychism in the sense that, we've had near-death experiences for much of history. Now we've been able to document them a bit more because of the advance of science. We've been able to document at least when brain death seems to occur. And then we also have the kind of the medical means to bring people sort of back to life in a way that historically we would have had a harder time doing. So near-death experiences we've had numerous growing reports that are really specified and refined reports of people on their deathbed without their bodies, but looking back on their bodies. We have numerous accounts of that, which would logically presuppose something like the sort of substance dualism that has been the sort of fallback view for most religions and most cultures throughout history, some kind of dualism. I'm open to panpsychism, at least a dualist-inclined panpsychism, because I think it can. Well, then you have to do stuff with the causal exclusion stuff, and I think we should just reject that principle altogether. Causal closure principle. We have spirits, we have souls, we have things like that historically we've naturally been inclined to believe that they do exist, that they can exist beyond the body, beyond the grave. And now we have this, well, is it empirical? It's pretty close to a strong empirical case, depending on how we're defining empirical criterion. It's a pretty strong case that subjects of conscious experience exist beyond their bodies, without their ears and their eyes. They're able to somehow see. Their consciousness seems to be expanded in some way. And so I think that's pretty profound evidence for something like dualism. But even more so, it's very compatible with the sort of theistic framework that we see in traditional religions like Christianity, where there is a life after death. And I think we should take that seriously. There was a recent a neuroscientist who was actually, there was a interesting write-up about this, who had this, it was actually in practice. It wasn't a theoretical thing that accidentally happened. He noted this, I wrote an article on it. I'm trying to remember the details. I probably should have sent it to you. I didn't think of it till now. But he noted the details of the experience of the subject while they seemed to be in a state of death or brain death. And they noted after they kind of woke up that they really did experience something like this hopeful euphoria. And they gave detailed accounts of a hopeful afterlife, which seems to indicate furthermore, not only that there is logically this subject, something like a soul, a substance, an immaterial substance that exists, but also something like traditional religion, that there is this hopeful afterlife that they had some encounter with. Now, there's ways to sort of deny that or reject that or give a hand wave. I mean, obviously, some would take those experiences non-literal. I don't have any good reason to take them as non-literal. I think these are like pretty robust accounts, and there's lots of them that are growing that seem to point beyond the sort of naturalistic frame that many of the panpsychists are operating out of to something like theism, where souls are just naturally a part of the ontological furniture of the world.